I've been a guide for over 50 years, and when I began, it was never my goal to guide in one place. I could have spent my entire career rowing rafts down the Colorado River. I could have spent my entire career guiding treks in Nepal. I always wanted to see the world. It was my goal to guide as many mountains and as many rivers in as many countries of the world as I could, and I'm happy to say, sitting here today, I've succeeded.
Welcome to the Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, international expedition guide, conservationist, and yogi, Mandela.
Today, the Trail Less Traveled is being recorded in the forest near Missoula. I'm sitting down with Skip Horner. He is an adventure guide extraordinaire. For the past 50 plus years, Skip has been leading a wide and creative range of expeditions all over the world. Skip has traveled to over 100 countries and has guided trips in 60. As a mountain guide, he was the first person to lead people to the tops of the 7 summits, the highest peak on each of the 7 continents, culminating with Mount Everest. He has also led ascents of dozens of other mountains worldwide, including 33 ascents of Kilimanjaro, 8 ascents of Mount Vinson, the highest peak in Antarctica, and a lot more. I'm not going to go into detail because every few months we hope to meet up and we're going to share a little bit about what is on his mind and where in the world he has most recently been. So I'm just honored to sit down with you, Skip. I look up to you and I thank you so much for joining me here today for the Trail Less Traveled. My first question for you is, what's on your mind right now? You were just telling me about taking a sabbatical as a guide.
Right. I have been professional guiding for over 50 years, mostly in the mountains, but also in rivers all around the world. And it's in the mountains where I have found my soul, found my identity. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those mountains. Just to add a little information to the bio you gave, it came to my attention last year when a book came out called Everest Inc., as in Incorporated. The author, who did extensive research and interviewed dozens of people, including me, at my home for over a 2-day period several summers ago, he decided that I, along with 3 other guides that day, May 12th, 1992, were the first people to guide Mount Everest, period. He decided that based on interviews with other people who I had assumed, had also guided Everest. David Brashears, among other people who took Dick Bass to the top. Nobody before us that day verbally took the responsibility for their clients, saying, I am with you. If we make it together, we make it together. If we don't summit, we don't summit together. If we have trouble, it'll be my job to make sure you get down safely. Even David Brashears didn't tell Dick Bass that. He kind of indicated that, I'm with you here, I'm watching out for you, but you're on your own, basically. We that day, Vern Tejas and I were on the rope together with a client. Rob Hall, famously from New Zealand, and his partner, Guy Cotter, also guided clients to the summit that day. Both groups summited together. So the 4 of us get credit, according to this book, and so as far as I know, it isn't disputed. We were the first to guide Mount Everest. You know, that was 1992, and this is 2025, so that's a long time ago. And all these years, I've made a thing about, I was the first to guide the 7 summits, which happened that same day. But the fact that we were the first to guide Everest, all of a sudden I went to myself, I said, wow, that's really something. I wish I had known that 30 years ago. You know, I'm in business. I run a guide service, and, you know, we have competitors out there, and people choose who to go with, and we're all looking for some kind of competitive advantage. I could have used that all these years. I could have used that as a selling point, which I didn't have. As it turned out, I guess I didn't need it because I had a successful business and most of my trips ran and I brought everybody home safely. But that is just one more thing in my life that I think about. I'm lying in bed at night trying to get to sleep. I think happy thoughts of people I've known and things I've done. And often I come back to that, and it's gotten to the point now where maybe it's boring enough to me that it puts me to sleep. But it's something I'm pretty proud of, as you can imagine. However, Everest was one trip. I went to the mountain twice. The first time we didn't make it. We got to high camp on the North Ridge, but the wind was blowing too much and the conditions were such that we were at the end of our own strength, so we had to turn back. But we came back and did summit in 92. I've been back to the base of Everest a couple of times since then. I've guided some other peaks near there. Got avalanched off one peak, not too far away, which is another story. But the mountain where I have spent most of my energy over the years is Kilimanjaro. And even though it's not a technical climb, it's still 19,000 feet, which requires dedication, strength, acclimatization, and great care to see that people get to the top and safely down again, which we always have. My most recent trip there was just in October last year, October of 24. For my 33rd time, I've gone back and looked at my journals, looked at the date books that I've been keeping for over 40 years now. I can account for almost every night of my life since about 1982. If you wanted to know where I slept, even in many cases, what hotel in Timbuktu or what campsite on the Zambezi or on the Alsek, I can tell you because I kept these journals. And that's why now that I'm on sabbatical, I'm not working anymore, I'm beginning to write my memoir. Whether or not it ever gets published, we'll see. But that's what I'm doing with my life right now, aside from shoveling snow. But I'm going back to my journals and my date books to jog my memory about all these things that I did. I've actually gone out and written on paper, 8.5 by 11 pad, every month since 1982 where I was. And maybe a couple of notes, of little details, a funny word or the name of a place that is unusual. So I've got like 8 sheets of paper, month by month by month by month by year, for 40 years now, exactly where I was all that time, which sounds pretty anal, which I guess it is. But now that I've done it, now that I can look back on all that, I can see where my life went. I can follow the progress of my life. If I just sit back and think, there's no way I could remember. Where was I May of 1997, even not that long ago, 20, 30 years ago? No way. But I can go back, flip. Oh, yeah, that's right. I was in Burkina Faso that month. So anyway, that's pretty fun. And that's the basis of this memoir that I'm writing. I'm trying to choose maybe not necessarily my 20 favorite trips, but 20 trips that really stand out in my mind that had an effect on me or were so unusual in their development that I'm really having a lot of fun writing the stories. And going back to my journals and remembering what I wrote, currently I'm rewriting and re-editing a 2-part story I wrote about my first trip to Gunnbjørnsfjeld. Do you know where Gunnbjørnsfjeld is? It's the highest mountain in the Arctic. And wouldn't you think we would all know the highest peak in the Arctic? No, I didn't. Back then, I didn't know. Many people assume Mount McKinley or Denali is the highest peak in the Arctic, but it is not in the Arctic. It's 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle. The highest peak in the Arctic is in Greenland. And when we first climbed it, it only had perhaps 5 ascents, all from a particular side, which turned out to be a lousy access to the summit, where most people didn't make it because of a loose rocky ridge and steep ice climbing. We went there in 1994, chartered a plane out of Iceland, flew up, and the pilot who owned the flight service had never been to the mountain either, so he flew us circles around the summit looking for the best route down there. And we could see the route that other people had gone up on this side, but on the other side was a longer glacier that seemed to lead on mostly snow, little ice, all the way to the top, with no rock involved, because the rock up there is crumbly and loose. And so he dropped us onto the glacier over on that side where apparently nobody had ever certainly landed a plane, and we believe nobody had ever set foot before we did. And we climbed the mountain. And not only that, but at the time, it was unsure which of three mountains in that little region was actually the highest. There are two other peaks a little further south, the next couple of valleys to the south from Gunnbjørnsfjeld, that when you're on top of Gunnbjørnsfjeld, you look over and you go, I don't know, those peaks might be higher. They look the same, they look higher, you can't tell. One of the earlier expeditions, the first team that actually climbed all three, their aneroid barometers showed that the other two peaks were higher than Gunnbjørnsfjeld. But aneroid barometers, of course, are unreliable because they rely on air pressure, which changes constantly. And even from hour to hour, certainly day to day, they can change by 100 or 200 feet, which in this case would totally change which is first, second, or third highest. They went back from their trip and announced that they had done the first ascent of the highest peak in the Arctic because they measured it that way. The Danes, who own and control Greenland, were skeptical. They still thought that Gunnbjørnsfjeld was the highest, but they had no way of proving it because at that point, nobody had proven it until we got there, because we took what at the time were state-of-the-art GPS units, and they were about the size of a small microwave oven. They were significant baggage to bring. We had two. My main client on that trip was Steve Fawcett, who famously solo ballooned around the world, first person to do that, set all sorts of speed records in his plane, sailed and broke records all over. Pretty famous, well-known guy who ultimately died when he crashed his plane into a mountain in the Sierras, and nobody knew where he was for a couple of years until they found him. He was a buddy of mine. He was a good friend. We went on several climbs together, including Everest. It was his idea that we measure these peaks. It was my idea to climb them, and he thought that was a great idea, but he said, let's measure them too. So he arranged for these GPS units, and we carried them with us and left one at the base camp on a timer, and then carried the other to the summit. We had to guess how long it would take us to get to the top because the timer had to go. We needed about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour of simultaneous readings from these two, one at base camp at a known elevation, and the other on the summit with us, measuring off, triangulating off at least three. In fact, we actually touched into about 12 satellites, got the measurement, went to camp, skied over to the other two peaks, climbed them the same way, left one GPS in camp, took the other to the summit. Each time we accurately guessed how long it would take us to get to the top. We got the measurements, we brought it home, sent it to the Danes. They put it all through their systems, their computers at the time, and decided that yes, in fact, Gunnbjørnsfjeld is the highest, that the peak they called Dome was the second highest, and Cone was the third highest, all within 150 feet of each other. But Gunnbjørn definitely is the highest. They thanked us because now they knew, now the world knew, which was in fact the highest peak in the Arctic, a significant point, and exactly how high it was. Our data was accurate like within 3 inches. So it became and is still the altitude given to Gunnbjørnsfjeld. Because of that, they said, you can name the second and third highest peaks if you want. We're not going to change the name of Gunnbjørnsfjeld, but you can name the second and third highest. So we did that, and that was part of the reward we had for doing this really unusual and really never before contemplated expedition.
You know, you're on sabbatical right now, doing a lot of thinking.
Yes, thinking a lot about my life. It's an interesting progression that we go through in life. At least this is how I think of myself personally, how the segments of my life, and I think for most people's lives, can read out like chapters in a book. There are periods when you did something, and then the next period you did something different, maybe with new people. My life is chopped up into, suppose, hundreds of chapters because there have been so many trips in my life. I mean, for 50 years, I probably averaged 6 destinations a year, many more trips, because I would do on the Biobío River in Chile, which at the time we all agreed was the best whitewater river in the world. We would do 5 or 6 trips a season, and I probably did 8 or 10 seasons down there. We got to know that river really well before the government of Chile decided to stick 3 dams right in the middle of it, and the river doesn't exist anymore. But one chapter of my life is the Biobío that went on for a couple of months a year for 15 or so years. Another river that most people, I think, have never heard of for good reason, it's called the Çoru River. It's in northeastern Turkey. It flows ultimately into Russia, and then into the far eastern end of the Black Sea. It drains the Kachgar Mountains, which are 13,000-foot peaks out there on the southeastern end of the Black Sea. My first time to Turkey, I really didn't care to go to Turkey, but Sobek at the time, who I was working for, told me that's the only trip we have going. If you want to do a trip, you're going to Turkey. And I said, well, I'm not so sure. I was just getting together at the time with my wife, Elizabeth, who had traveled at that point more than I had. She had traveled all through the Middle East and Asia, and I really admired all that. And she said, you got to go to Turkey. It's my favorite country. It never occurred to me that Turkey could be anybody's favorite country. But this woman who I loved and really respected said that. I went, okay, I'll go to Turkey. And of course, I have been really happy ever since, because Turkey's really a wonderful country, wonderful people, beautiful geography. And this river, the Choroo, is about the same flow as the Grand Canyon, give or take, anywhere from 3,000 cubic feet per second to maybe 20 or 30,000 when it floods. And I was there with one other boatman, Jack Morrison, rest his soul, died a number of years ago. Jack and I did a number of first descents together, and we really grew to trust each other. We got to the Choroo, which a river in 3 sections. The upper section was like class 3, had been run a couple of times. The middle section, which was only about 30 miles long, the upper section's maybe 100. The middle section's about 30, the lower section's another 40 or 50. The middle section is where the technicality begins. This gorge, the Yusufeli Gorge, is about 15 miles of nonstop class 4, class 5, potentially class 6 whitewater, very serious water. Unlike many rivers in the world, the Turks have built a road all along this river. It's mountainous country, and this is a deep canyon, and there's no way to get around. The roads can't be punched in over these high mountains. So they cut a road through this gorge, down through the Yusufeli Gorge, which was great because we could hire a taxi from this town just at the top of the gorge to drive us down along the river, and we got to scout the whole 15-mile section of whitewater by taxi. So we could jump out of the taxi, run over to the edge, look down, take notes. We kept notes the first time we got there, and then jump back in the taxi, drive down a little ways, get out again. We didn't have to walk 15 miles down and then back. We couldn't have done that. But we were looking at this river going, I don't know if this is runnable. This is really, really wild water. As it turned out, we ultimately would do probably 25 descents of the Choroo before they dammed it also. But this very first time in that particular event was the highest water we would ever see. We didn't know that at the time. We thought this was normal. It was the 1st of June, so it was the height of the runoff. And we were going, I don't know if I want to run this. This is pretty scary. But then we're thinking, well, each section that we looked at, each rapid, it was class 5. It was very serious stuff, but we were both really on top of our game at that point. We figured we were probably the best whitewater boatmen in the world, period, at that point, because we had done so much, so consistently for so long, and we knew our boats, we knew our body, we knew each other. So we were both at the same time looking for reasons why we should run this, but we were also looking for excuses not to have to run it. And so we got out of the taxi at one point and ran over a couple hundred yards to the edge of the canyon and looked in, and there was a village across the way, and there were a bunch of men standing around on the road out here speaking Turkish, which we didn't understand. And we got over, and their footbridge that led from the roadside where we were over to the other side where the town was, the abutment that supported it on the other side had washed out in the spring flood. And now this footbridge with wooden slats and 1-inch cables had slipped into the river And the bridge was shore to shore, right in the middle of the river, right at boat level. Impossible to bring a boat through there. And so Jack and I went, we can't run this rapid, so we can't run the river because there's nowhere else to put in or take out except above and below. And we looked at each other going, that's great, but no, it's not, And the bridge, the way it was functionless. It had to be removed to replace. Sooner or later, someone was going to rip it out and replace it. I said to Jack, let's take it out right now. So we went back to town, Yusuf Ali, hired a guy that had an acetylene torch, told him what we were doing, and he just shrugged and said, okay. And we went out, went across this one-person cable crossing to the other side. He cut the cables out, and the bridge swung into the eddy, opening up the river. And now we were committed to running this section of water, which now we were committed. And the beauty of this is there was no more equivocal thinking, should we not? All these now hundreds of Turks were out there watching what we were doing, plus our clients, plus ourselves. For ourselves and for Sobek and for our passengers, we felt we had to run this section. We had to do it. Now that we'd done this, we had committed ourselves, we had to do it. So we took another day, Jack and I, up and down the river, scouting it, writing notes, drawing maps of all the rapids, because there's giant boulders and huge holes and very narrow bridges between disastrous locations in the middle of this river. I mean, if a boat turned over anywhere upstream and everybody would float all the way out, people would be really in bad shape. So we knew we couldn't flip. We had to stay upright. But some of the runs were so narrow, you had to hit them exactly right. And we're like, oh, man. But we made these maps, and we wrote the routes, and we tested each other. I said, okay, Jack, what is high tension? We gave names to all the rapids. Some were good names like high tension. There was a power line that went across the river right there. What's the configuration? What's the run? Okay, well, you enter center left, and you dodge around the boulder, and you pull hard right, get around the next big hole, this kind of thing. And there were probably 15 major Class 5 rapids that we had to absolutely memorize. Next day, we took all of our equipment, put it in a truck to drive down to the lower end. So we were in our sporty little boats, Avon Pro, Squareback Pros. That was the best non-self-bailing whitewater boat ever made by Avon. That's what we used everywhere we went. We put in that river, and neither one of us said, I want to be first, but we went in and ran each rapid. And of course, we ran into trouble. We didn't run every run the way we're supposed to. Along with all the other information, we wrote out possible escape routes if we missed a cut somewhere. So we knew some places where we might save ourselves if we missed the right route. I was first, and then Jack was first, and then I was first again. And as we got near each other, we'd call out, what's next? And high tension's next, or King Kong is next. And what's the run? Enter left, pull right, don't hit the hole, watch out, all these information. We had it memorized. We both went to bed those previous 2 nights thinking, memorizing the order of the rapids and then the runs and the danger points. And we had that 15-mile Yusuf Ali Gorge absolutely memorized. And we both knew, even though in our minds we were the best in the world at this, we knew we could still really screw up. And our passengers knew it too, and they could have taken the taxi downstream if they had wanted to. They didn't have to be in our boats. We had 4, 2 in each boat, and they all said, no, we're going. Which was a good thing, because these were bucket boats. They weren't self-bailing, so our clients, the passengers, spent most of the gorge bailing. If they weren't bailing, they were just hanging on, because they were high-siding and, rocking and rolling and bailing and hanging on, and oh my God, it was crazy. It probably took us 45 minutes to run 15 miles, nonstop, fast, whitewater, boom, 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 nonstop. And we got to the bottom. King Kong was the final big, wild, crazy, dangerous rapid. We knew the worst was still to come. No matter how well we did upstream, we still had King Kong ahead of us. And we got below King Kong and found there's an eddy. And oh my God, there's Jack died of cancer. But I know wherever he is up there, He's listening to me right now because that cemented our friendship. We did a wild Indus River expedition, the first ascent of part of the Indus, and we did the first ascent of the Biobío together, a lot of rivers together, but it was this little-known river in Turkey that cemented that friendship that will last forever in my mind, and I know in Jack's too. As well, on that trip was a client, a passenger named Dick Mersch, who was a doctor, my father's generation, 20 years older, who became a close friend of mine, who ultimately saved my life in Madagascar, which will be another story.
That's the voice of Skip Horner talking about the first descent of the Çoru River in Turkey. And while he was talking, I got the map out so that I could follow along. Man, I feel like I just ran some whitewater and I'm in the eddy below.
It's great to talk to somebody who cares and wants to hear.
Oh, yes. Where does the story naturally flow to now after Turkey?
I suppose from Turkey it naturally flows to Antarctica, which may sound odd, but that's the kind of changes that I went through throughout my career, guiding rivers in Turkey, and then a few months later I'm guiding a mountain in Antarctica. Back in the mid to late 80s, Dick Bass set his goal to climb the 7 summits, the highest peak in each of the 7 continents. And he made no bones about it. He's a loud guy, big talker, and everybody in the community, in the mountain community, knew he was doing this and going for it. I, at that point, had been guiding mountains for maybe 10 years. I had guided a couple of the continental high points at that point. I'd been up Kilimanjaro a few times. I'd been to Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe. It amazed me at the time that nobody had thought of this before, that somebody decided to climb the highest point on each continent. What a cool idea. Why didn't someone think of this a long time ago? The answer is the access to at least 2 of those peaks was almost impossible. Everest, of course, back in those days, they gave 1 permit per season for 1 expedition. And they were all these big national expeditions with governmental support, which I wouldn't have had access to. But also the highest peak in Antarctica, Mount Vinson, you couldn't get there. There was no way to get to Antarctica. The NSF, the National Science Foundation, pretty much controlled access to the entire continent, and they really weren't interested in mountaineering and tourism. They, in fact, had inspired and supported the first ascent of the mountain by some American climbers, pretty well-known guys. So the route was understood. Access was still very difficult, but with Dick's money and connections, they arranged for air transport to get to Vinson at 79 degrees south in the middle of the ice, in the middle of this beautiful mountain range. And Vinson is 16,000 feet high, so pretty intimidating place when you think of the latitude and the altitude involved here. I was going to try to guide the 7 summits. That became my goal. I thought, if Dick can climb them all, why can't I guide them all? And I knew good reasons why I couldn't, because I couldn't get to the mountains. But all of a sudden, it seemed like access was opening up. I got an opportunity. A friend of mine was on the 2nd ascent of Vinson, and he had arranged through all sorts of devious means to return 2 years later. Unfortunately for him, his personality was sort of grating on the people involved, and they wouldn't allow him back. They said, "You can't come back to Antarctica with us." But he had arranged with the Chinese to bring 2 Chinese climbers to Vinson. And if they summited, this guy Mike Dunn and I and some others got a permit to climb Everest from the north side. So all of a sudden, Mike wasn't allowed to go to Vinson, to Antarctica. He told me, he said, "You got to guide these people." And I said, "Yes, I'm your man." He didn't tell me that if those 2 Chinese climbers didn't reach the top, we would not get our permit for Everest. I assumed we were getting our permit for Everest because we were paying for all these 2 Chinese guys to go all the way down and climb the mountain. Well, as it turned out, the Chinese 2 climbers did summit, and we did get our Everest permit, which is another story. I had 3 clients with me. The 2 Chinese climbers were off on their own. They were professional climbers, and they didn't need me to guide them. But I had 3 clients who were good, strong climbers, American men, and they pretty much needed a guide with them to keep it all together. And as far as we knew, especially as far as I knew, this was going to be my one chance to get to the top of Vinson and to hopefully become the first to guide the 7 summits. We got in there, and these 3 clients were strong. They were good. We got to high camp, which took 9 days, 3 days to get to the first camp, and 3 more to second camp, 3 more to high camp at about 13,000 feet. At which point the weather began to change. It became windy, high clouds rolled in. It was still climbable, but it got really pretty tough conditions, cold, windy. Prior to going, I had talked to Pat Morrow, a Canadian man who arguably was the first person to climb the 7 summits because he climbed Karstens instead of Kosciuszko. Another story. But Pat had climbed Vinson, and he gave me some instruction. He said, from high camp, you go up the ice face right overhead, continue into this high valley, and the peak is right at the end of the high valley. You can't miss it. So I said, okay, off we went. Summit day, we climbed this icy face in front of us into this high valley. And because of the clouds, there were no shadows, there was no real perspective. And I saw 3 mountains at the top of the valley. One was to the right, a little closer, one in the middle, and one further back to the left. And I couldn't tell which was the highest peak. And Pat had made it sound like it's obvious, you can't miss it. Well, it wasn't obvious to me. And I looked at all 3 peaks, and I decided the one near probably wasn't the highest because it was closest, and therefore it may look high, but it probably wasn't. The other 2, I couldn't tell. So I decided it had to be the one on the left further back because it was further away, and therefore it probably was higher. And so we go off into the wind, and it wasn't really blowing hard. It was just breezy, but it was like 25 below zero. And we are really extended out of camp, and there was nobody else in camp. We were alone on the mountain at this point. Heading up, and I still wasn't sure. We kept walking up this rather easy glacial valley, and I asked my clients, which one do you think is the highest? And they looked at me kind of disturbed because I'm the guide, I'm supposed to know. And I couldn't tell. So I said, well, I think it's that one on the left, so let's go. And we went off there, and it took us quite a while to get back in there. And as we got closer to it, I began to realize that this is not the right peak. But the other peak, the one in the middle, was now inaccessible. We would have had to backtrack all the way. We didn't have the means to do that. But we kept going until we got near the top of this other peak, and we could see the peak in the middle was towering over us, that I had made the wrong decision. And we had to turn back, and we had to go all the way back to camp because now the weather was coming in and we were tired. And of course, we had no radio back then. We were on our own, which was good in its own way. It was a feeling of isolation and self-reliance that isn't available anymore. We went back to camp, and I was totally bummed out because I had really screwed up my only chance to climb Vinson. I had screwed things up for my clients who had paid a lot of money to be there and put all their money in the bank on me, and I had let them down and guided them up the wrong mountain. And they were pissed at me, of course. I can guarantee I've never been so low in the mountains as I was that evening. I remember, even though it was so cold outside, we had 2 tents. I was with one of my clients and 2 others in the other tent. And I didn't want to be in the tent with my one client because I really screwed up that day and didn't want to be around him. So I sat outside, and there's a photograph of me sitting there with my legs spread and the MSR stove right here, and I'm bundled up, just bummed out, melting snow, to make water to get dinner going. I just couldn't believe I'd made that mistake, blown this huge opportunity. And as I sat there thinking, and I finally lifted up my eyes to the sky and saw that, wow, clouds have cleared. The clouds have cleared. And hey, the wind died. It's not blowing anymore. It was too late that day to go up, but I called to the guys. I said, hey, the weather's changing. We can go back tomorrow. We have time. We'll go back tomorrow. And they went, they weren't having it. I was a piece of dirt to them at that point. The next morning, it was still blue sky, no wind, and we knew the route now. We went up the ice face, up the canyon, climbed. There's a pretty good head wall that you need to climb, and then up on the summit ridge, and we summited. We did it. And I'm not sure I would say that Vinson is my favorite mountain in the world. I don't think I can say any particular peak is my favorite, but I can say without a doubt that that was my favorite and my best ascent ever, because I had made such a big mistake the day before, and I'd felt so bad about what I had done, not just for me, but really for my clients as well. That is my favorite climb ever. We summited, and I just remember that feeling of unbounded joy and happiness, and the world was wonderful, and I was in love with everything and everyone. And my clients too. We were all just dancing around, yelling and screaming and hugging on the summit because from the failure of the day before and the unwillingness we had to accept the failure and give up, we pushed on the next day and we made it. And if that isn't a lesson for all of us, to not accept defeat, not to accept mistakes that we made and assume that that's the end of things, because most often you can analyze what you've done, analyze what you did wrong, think about why you made the mistake and what led to it, and then rectify it all, and then make good on your hope. That was quite an experience. That was really the highest I've ever felt in the mountains right there. I've been back to the summit a number of times since then. I would go every other year for quite a long time guiding Vinson. And each time was wonderful because people put a lot of effort and money and time to be there and hiring me to guide them up. Every time was a super high experience, but each time I was on the top, I would remember that first time. I remember the joy I felt on that first summit, and I could reconjure that same feeling of joy and happiness and success and fulfillment from that one first ascent. And it would have been wonderful had we not made the mistake the day before and just summited that first day. But because we had done that, made that second summit, the second day, the first summit, that much more meaningful, because we had pushed beyond what we thought was possible and turned failure into success.
That's the voice of Skip Horner. He has been guiding all over the world for the past 50 plus years. And we're talking about Mount Vinson Massif, which is located in Antarctica. There's many, many more stories to tell, and we are going to slowly but surely connect and continue to share them. But Skip, I wanted to see if there was a little bit of advice that you wanted to end this particular episode with, and then maybe a song.
When I think back on my career, and especially on the clients that I've guided to so many places, and often had problems along the way that seemed intractable at the time, unresolvable problems, I realized, and I have come to know, that sitting around, being stationary, worried about problems, worried about issues, many of which we have little control over, but those that we do have control over, if you just start moving in any direction, it doesn't have to be toward the ultimate goal, just move from where you are, wherever you're stuck with this problem, with something you can't figure out, or with an emotional feeling that seems like it has no easy solution. If you just start moving, whether it's physical movement, walking toward the mountain, even if it's not the right direction, or emotionally, mentally moving in your mind away from the problem you're experiencing and thinking about some way that it might be resolved, movement is the solution. If we could just keep moving in any direction, because any direction will get you moving and giving you more perspective on where you might want to end up. To me, movement is the key to problem solving.
Hello, my name is Kelly. I'm a Montana Master Naturalist, board member, and longtime volunteer with the Montana Natural History Center. Our mission is to promote and cultivate the appreciation, understanding, and stewardship of nature through education. Here's my naturalist tip of the week. Having a bad day? Go outside. Close your eyes and listen to the sounds of nature. Breathe deeply. Breathe slowly. Feel your mind and your body relax. This is also a great thing to do if you're having a good day.
That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, conservation is not a spectator sport. Living in Missoula is a privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Please get educated and engaged. Speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, well, then you've never spent the night with a mosquito.